The wind howled through the cracks in the courthouse roof, a chilling whisper carrying an unspoken omen. Inside, the air was thick, oppressive, a silence so heavy it pressed down on every chest, making each breath feel like a struggle against an invisible force. Every eye in the packed courtroom was fixed on the man at its center. Sergeant Nathan Carter, seated in his wheelchair, his olive-green military uniform hugged his battle-worn frame, medals gleaming on his chest under the cold fluorescent lights, though they couldn't hide the hollowed eyes that bore the scars of war and loss. His hand gripped the leash tightly, knuckles white against his calloused skin. Beside him stood Thor, German Shepherd, with a calm yet vigilant demeanor, ears perked as if attuned to something beyond human perception. To strangers, Thor was just a military dogger tool trained to obey and serve. But to Nathan, Thor was everything. He was the comrade who dragged him from the edge of death amid the smoke and fire of the battlefield. The only light in the darkest days after the war, when even looking in the mirror became a torment. Thor wasn't just a dog. Thor was family. The judge, a middle-aged man with a face carved from stone, gazed down from his elevated bench. His voice cut through the stillness, dry and devoid of warmth. "Sergeant Carter, this is your final chance to speak. The Army has made its decision. Thor is government property and will be reassigned to another mission. Do you have anything to say?" The crowd held its breath. A few spectators wiped away tears. Others murmured to one another, their eyes flickering with a mix of pity and outrage. Nathan inhaled deeply, fighting the tremor in his voice as he lifted his head. "Your Honor," he began, his tone raw and heavy with emotion, "Thor isn't just an asset. He's saved me not once, but dozens of times. In the field, he pulled me from danger, shielded me from gunfire, warned me of traps I couldn't see. And when I came home, when I didn't even know who I was anymore, Thor was there. He gave me a reason to keep going. Taking him away now, it's like ripping my heart out of my chest." Silence blanketed the room. A few muffled sobs broke from the gallery. The judge lowered his gaze, his eyes sweeping over Nathan and settling briefly on Thor, as if weighing something unspoken. But before he could respond, something strange happened. Thor, who had been standing still beside Nathan, suddenly sprang to his feet. The leash slipped from Nathan's grasp for a fleeting moment as the dog lunged toward the judge's bench, his sharp barks echoing through the chamber. The crowd gasped, a few cried out, and the bailiff nearby stepped forward, hand instinctively on his holstered gun. But Thor didn't attack. His barks weren't threats, they carried a different meaning, one Nathan recognized instantly. "Thor," Nathan called, his voice cracking with panic. But deep down, he knew. He'd seen this behavior too many times on the battlefield. Thor wasn't just barking, he was warning. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "What's happening? What's wrong with the dog?" A voice muttered from the back row. Nathan clenched his jaw, wheeling himself forward slightly, his voice trembling, yet resolute. "Your Honor, Thor isn't barking for no reason. He's trained to detect danger bombs, enemies, anything that threatens lives. If he's doing this, something's wrong. He's trying to tell us something." The judge froze, his gavel hovering midair. His eyes locked onto Thor, now standing before the bench, body rigid, ears erect, a low growl rumbling from his throat. The sound didn't stop, it reverberated, piercing through the dark wooden walls, slicing the silence like a blade. And then, everyone felt it. An unease creeping through the room, as if the air itself had grown heavier, more suffocating. Nathan stared at Thor, his heart pounding. He knew this dog better than anyone. Thor was never wrong. If he sensed danger, it was closer than anyone in that room could imagine. Chapter 1. The Dark Hallway. No one dared move. Thor's growls pulsed steadily, holding the room in a vice of tension. The older bailiff, a broad-shouldered man with wary eyes, stepped forward, his hand resting on his pistol. "It's just a dog, right?" he muttered. But the quiver in his voice betrayed his confidence. He edged toward the heavy wooden door at the far end of the courtroom, the spot where Thor's gaze was fixed. "Don't!" Nathan shouted, his voice ringing in the confined space. If Thor senses something, we need to check it first. Don't take the risk. But the bailiff didn't stop. He gripped the door handle, turned it slowly, and the door creaked open with a groan. Beyond it lay a pitch-black hallway, the courtroom's light barely reaching the first few feet. Thor's growls intensified, his body taut as a bowstring, ready to spring at any moment. "What's this?" The younger bailiff, who'd just pulled a flashlight from his belt, murmured. He swept the beam into the hall, revealing only a polished tile floor and empty walls. "Nothing here," he said, but the tremor in his tone suggested he didn't believe his own words. The crowd stirred. A few stood, clutching their bags, eyes darting toward the exits. Fear spread like wildfire, consuming the last remnants of calm. Nathan gritted his teeth, fighting to stay composed. He knew Thor didn't act without cause. This dog had saved him from hidden bombs, from enemies lurking in shadows. If Thor was warning them, danger wasn't just possible, it was certain. And then, a sound came from the hallway. A single, deliberate footstep, slow, heavy, as if someone were testing the patience of everyone in the room. Thor let out a fierce bark, lunging forward so hard Nathan nearly lost hold of the leash. "Someone's there!" The younger bailiff cried, his voice breaking in panic. His flashlight trembled in his hand, and for a fleeting moment, the beam caught a figure tall, silent, standing in the darkness. "Police, step out now!" The older bailiff roared, drawing his gun, but the figure didn't move. Instead, a low, chilling voice emerged from the shadows. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for the dog." Nathan felt the blood freeze in his veins. He looked at Thor, then back at the darkness. This man knew about Thor. He wanted Thor, but why? And more importantly, who was he? Chapter 2. The Man in the Shadows. The air in the courtroom turned stifling, as if the stranger's presence had drained every ounce of oxygen from the room. Thor's growls grew fiercer, the fur on his neck bristling, his sharp eyes locked on the darkness at the end of the hallway. The older bailiff, now with his gun drawn and aimed at the figure, shouted again, "Hands up! Step out now, or I'll shoot." But the stranger didn't flinch. He stepped forward from the shadows, each move slow and deliberate. The flashlight's beam caught him, revealing a tall figure draped in a long dark gray coat. His face was hidden beneath a hood, only his piercing eyes glinting like steel in the dim light. He stopped at the hallway's edge, hands in his pockets, his posture eerily relaxed amidst the mounting tension. "I've already said," his voice was low and steady, unshaken, "I'm here for the dog. No need to make this a spectacle." Nathan clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on the leash until his knuckles turned white. "Who are you?" he demanded, struggling to keep his anger and fear in check. "What do you want with Thor?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if sizing Nathan up. A faint smile curled beneath the shadow of his hood. "I know this dog," he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "I know what it can do, and I need it." The judge slammed his gavel, the sound reverberating but failing to drown out Thor's growls. "Enough!" he bellowed, his voice trembling despite his attempt at authority. "This is a courtroom, not a stage for your games. Bailiffs, arrest this man now." The two bailiffs advanced guns trained on the stranger. But before they could close the distance, he raised one hand not in surrender, but as a signal. From behind him, two more figures emerged from the hallway's darkness. They were tall, clad in black, their faces obscured by hoods. One held a sharp metal rod, the other gripped a pistol, their presence sending a wave of panic through the crowd. Spectators screamed, some rushing toward the exits. "Stand still!" the older bailiff shouted, his voice now laced with alarm. But the lead stranger only smiled, his gaze never leaving Nathan. "Sergeant Carter," he said, his tone like a storyteller recounting an old tale, "you don't understand. Thor doesn't belong to you, it belongs to something far greater. And we're here to take it back." Nathan's heart seized. He knew his name. He knew Thor. This wasn't a random attack, it was planned. But for what? Thor lunged forward, the leash stretching taut, dragging Nathan slightly as he struggled to hold him. "You're not taking him," Nathan roared, his voice echoing through the chaos. "Thor's my family. You want him. You'll have to go through me first. The stranger's smile faded. He studied Nathan for a long moment, his cold eyes narrowing as if weighing his resolve. Then he turned to his companions, giving a slight nod. Fine, he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. If you want to play this game, we'll play. But you'll regret it soon enough. He turned and stepped back into the hallway's shadows, his two companions following. Their footsteps echoed briefly before fading, leaving the room in a deathly silence. Thor stopped growling, but remained rigid, his eyes still fixed on the no-closed door. Nathan panted, his hands still clutching the leash. He didn't know who that man was, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. And whatever lay ahead, he and Thor would face it together. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Past. The courtroom slowly regained a semblance of calm, though no one dared believe the threat had truly passed. A few spectators sank back into their seats, hands clutching their belongings, eyes darting toward the door, as if expecting the stranger's return. The judge, looking paler than usual, set his gavel down, his voice hoarse. This hearing is adjourned. We need to resolve this before proceeding. Nathan barely registered the ruling. His focus was on Thor, who had settled beside him, but kept his ears perked, alert. He ran a hand over Thor's head, feeling the warmth of his fur, small comfort amid the storm raging in his mind. "You're okay, buddy?" he whispered, soft enough that only he and Thor could hear. But his thoughts spun relentlessly. That man knew about Thor not just as a military dog, but as something more. He knew Thor's abilities, his instincts. That meant something bigger was at play, something beyond the army's decision to reassign him. Why now? Why here? A bailiff approached, his face still taut with tension. "Sergeant Carter," he said quietly, avoiding attention. "Do you know who that guy was? He seemed dead set on you and the dog." Nathan shook his head, his gaze lingering on Thor. "No idea, but he knew me, and he knew Thor. That's not normal." The bailiff nodded, then turned to his colleague. "We need to check that hallway. Call for backup. If there's anything dangerous, we handle it now." Nathan said nothing more. He sat there, hand resting on Thor, but a memory flickered to life, one he'd tried to bury long ago. 3 years earlier, in a shattered village in Afghanistan, Nathan and Thor had been part of a covert mission. Their task was to locate a hidden weapons cache suspected to be under the control of a mysterious insurgent group. It wasn't logged in official records of Black Op, as the army called it. Thor had sniffed out the secret entrance, and Nathan's team had stormed in, destroying the cache before the enemy could react. But something about those insurgents had been off. They weren't typical terrorists. They were organized, equipped with advanced tech, and most strangely they seemed to know about Thor. During the retreat, Nathan had overheard a commander shouting in a language he didn't understand, but the word Thor cut through the chaos, clear as day. He'd reported it to his superiors, but they'd dismissed it. "Just a coincidence," they'd said. "Don't overthink it." Now, with the stranger's appearance in the courtroom, Nathan couldn't help but wonder. Was this tied to that past? Was Thor the key to a secret he'd never been told? Chapter 4. A Restless Night. After the hearing was suspended, Nathan was escorted out of the courthouse by the two bailiffs. They didn't say much, but their uneasy glances spoke volumes. The heavy wooden door where the stranger had vanished was searched, yielding nothing but an empty hallway and faint boot prints on the tiles. It didn't ease Nathan's mind. He knew Thor didn't react without reason, and that man wasn't a ghost. He was real, and he'd be back. The sky outside had turned a dull gray, thick clouds, swallowing the sunset. Nathan wheeled himself to the parking lot, Thor walking beside him with unwavering vigilance. The wind whipped through the barren trees, its keening wail setting Nathan's nerves on edge. He paused, scanning the area. No one followed, but the sensation of being watched clung to him like a shadow. "You feel it too, don't you, Thor?" Nathan murmured, stroking the dog's head. Thor looked up, his piercing eyes meeting Nathan's, then turned to survey their surroundings. He didn't growl, but the tension in his frame told Nathan that danger hadn't passed. As they reached Nathan's weathered pickup truck, A man stepped out from behind a nearby lamppost. He wore a frayed military jacket, dark hair falling over half his face, but the crooked grin on his lips made Nathan instantly wary. "Sergeant Carter," the man said, his voice raspy, like it was clogged with cigarette smoke. "Heard you had some trouble in court today." Nathan tightened his grip on the leash, eyes locked on the stranger. "Who are you, and what do you want?" The man raised his hands as if in surrender, though the grin didn't fade. "Easy now, I'm a friend, not a foe. Name's Jace Harper. Used to be a soldier, like you. And I know about Thor." At the mention of Thor's name, the dog growled, his body stiffening. Nathan placed a hand on his head, signaling calm, but kept his focus on Jace. "What do you know about Thor, and why should I trust you?" Jace shrugged, stepping closer but halting when Thor bared his teeth. "I know he's not just any military dog. I've heard stories whispers around campfires in the field. A dog that can smell death before it strikes. And I think those guys in the courtroom today know it too." Nathan frowned. "What do you mean? Who are they?" Jace glanced around, as if afraid of eavesdroppers, then lowered his voice. "I'm not sure, but I've seen their kind before. They're not regular army, not typical insurgents either. They're part of something darker, an outfit that operates in the shadows, hunting for rare things-living weapons like Thor. And I'm betting he's on their list." A chill ran down Nathan's spine. He recalled the insurgents in Afghanistan, the way they'd singled out Thor as if they'd known him beforehand. But he still didn't fully trust Jace. "Why tell me this? What's in it for you?" Jace's gaze softened, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "I had a partner once, like Thor, not a dog, but a friend. I lost him because I didn't act fast enough. It haunts me every day. I don't want to see that happen to you. Consider this a warning. Don't let Thor out of your sight. They'll come back, and next time, they won't just talk." Before Nathan could press further, Jace turned and melted into the parking lot's shadows, leaving him with a flood of unanswered questions. He looked at Thor, the unease in his chest swelling. If Jace was right, the threat wasn't just the army's reassignment. Something bigger, something sinister, was stalking them. Chapter 5. A Sleepless Night. The adjourned hearing left Nathan free to leave the courthouse under the watchful eyes of the two bailiffs. They said little, but their tense expressions betrayed their unease. The heavy wooden door where the stranger had vanished was inspected, revealing nothing but an empty hallway and faint scuff marks on the tiles. It did little to calm Nathan's nerves. He knew Thor's instincts were never wrong, and that man wasn't a phantom, he was real, and he'd return. Outside, the sky had darkened to a bleak gray, thick clouds swallowing the last traces of daylight. Nathan wheeled himself across the parking lot, Thor at his side, his steps steady and alert. The wind sliced through the leafless trees, its mournful howl prickling Nathan's skin. He paused, scanning the surroundings. No one trailed them, yet the feeling of unseen eyes clung to him like damp fog. "You sense it too, don't you, Thor?" Nathan murmured, running a hand over the dog's head. Thor looked up, his keen eyes locking with Nathan's, before sweeping the area again. He didn't growl, but the tautness in his frame told Nathan the threat lingered. They reached Nathan's battered pickup truck, just as a figure emerged from behind a nearby lamppost. He wore a worn military jacket, his dark hair tousled over half his face, but the crooked grin he flashed set Nathan on edge. "Sergeant Carter," the man said, his voice rough, like gravel scraped by years of smoke. "Heard you ran into some trouble in court today." Nathan tightened his grip on Thor's leash, his stare unwavering. "Who are you, and what do you want?" The man raised his hands in mock surrender, though his grin held "Take it easy. I'm a friend, not an enemy. Name's Jace Harper, ex-soldier, like you. And I know about Thor." Thor growled at the mention of his name, his body stiffening. Nathan rested a hand on him, signaling calm, but kept his focus on Jace. "What do you know about Thor, and why should I trust you?" Jace shrugged, stepping closer but stopping when Thor bared his teeth. "I know he's more than just a military dog. I've heard tales whispers around campfires in the field. A dog that can sniff out death before it strikes. And I'd wager those guys in the courtroom know it too. Nathan's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Who are they? Jace glanced around, as if wary of being overheard, then lowered his voice. I don't know for sure, but I've seen their type before. They're not regular army, not your average insurgents either. They're part of something shadowy, a group that hunts rare things, living weapons like Thor. And I'm betting he's on their radar. A shiver crawled up Nathan's spine. He thought back to Afghanistan, the strange insurgents, the way they'd singled out Thor as if they'd known him. But trust didn't come easy. Why tell me this? What's your angle? Jace's eyes darkened, a flicker of regret crossing his face. I had a partner once, like Thor, not a dog, but a friend. I lost him because I didn't act fast enough. It eats at me every day. I don't want you to go through that. Take this as a heads up, keep Thor close. They'll come back, and next time, they won't just talk. Before Nathan could press further, Jace turned and vanished into the parking lot's gloom, leaving him with a tangle of questions. He looked at Thor, unease swelling in his chest. If Jace was right, the danger wasn't just the army's reassignment. Something darker was closing in. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He sat in his small suburban apartment, the dim glow of a desk lamp casting shadows over the scars on his hands, marks of war he couldn't erase. Thor lay curled at his feet, but his ears remained perked, as if guarding, even in rest. The clock on the wall ticked past 1 a.m. when Nathan's phone buzzed. He frowned, reaching for the battered device. The caller ID was blocked. He hesitated, then pressed answer. Hello, his voice rasped from exhaustion. Silence stretched on the other end, then a low voice broke through the same chilling tone from the courtroom. Sergeant Carter, it said, cold as ice, you should hand over the dog. This is your last warning. Nathan gripped the phone, his pulse racing. Who are you? What do you want with Thor? A faint chuckle crackled through the line. You don't need to know who I am. As for why, that dog isn't just a pet, it's a key, and you're holding something you don't understand, a key to what? Nathan growled, fighting to stay calm. To something much bigger than you, the voice replied. Give it up, or we'll come take it. And next time, it won't just be 3 of us. The call cut off before Nathan could respond. He flung the phone onto the table, his hand trembling. Thor lifted his head, staring at him with those piercing eyes, as if he'd felt the threat to. Nathan stood, wheeling himself to the window, and peering out. The night was pitch black, no sign of life. But he knew they were out there, watching. And this time, he couldn't just wait for them to strike. Chapter 6. The Midnight Call. Nathan wasn't one to give up. He'd survived war, endured days he thought he'd never outlast all. Thanks to Thor, he wouldn't let anyone, army or otherwise, rip away his only companion. He began to prepare. From an old closet, he pulled out a dusty military backpack, stuffed with gear from his battlefield days, a folding knife, a handgun, and a few spare clips. He checked the pistol, the cold metal in his hand offering a sliver of reassurance. He didn't want to use it, but if it meant protecting Thor, he wouldn't hesitate. We've got to move, Thor, Nathan said, his voice low but firm. Thor stood, his stance ready, like a soldier awaiting orders. Nathan clipped the leash to his collar, leaving it loose if it came to it. Thor needed freedom to act. Before leaving the apartment, Nathan scrawled a note and left it on the table. Jace, you see this? Find me. I need answers. He wasn't sure if Jace could be trusted, but if the man knew anything about their pursuers, Nathan needed his help. As the apartment door clicked shut behind them, Nathan and Thor stepped into the night. The pickup truck waited in the lot, and Nathan hoisted himself in, letting Thor take the passenger seat. The engine roared to life, shattering the night's stillness, and they sped off. No destination in mind, just the need to stay ahead of the hunters. Chapter 7. Action Before Dawn. Nathan drove for 3 hours, no clear purpose beyond putting distance between them and their pursuers. As dawn's first light crept over the horizon, he pulled into an old gas station off the highway. Its neon sign flickering weakly in the morning mist. He filled the tank, eyes constantly scanning the area. Thor sat in the truck, ears perked, tracking every movement outside. Everything seemed normal. A few semis parked nearby. A middle-aged man in a fur-lined coat sipping coffee by the vending machine. But then Nathan noticed something. On a weathered billboard near the station, a small scrap of paper was pinned, its edges torn by the wind. He wheeled closer, and when he read the scrawled words, his heart thudded. Thor's not safe. Meet me at Redwood Bridge, 8 a.m. Jace. He'd found him, but how, and why Redwood Bridge, nearly 50 miles away? Nathan checked his watch. 6:30 a.m. If he left now, he'd make it. But a bigger question gnawed at him. Was this a trap? Thor growled softly from the truck, as if urging a decision. Nathan took a deep breath and returned to the driver's seat. "All right, buddy," he said, resolve hardening his voice. "We're meeting Jace, but if it's a setup, I swear, I'll make them pay." He started the engine, and they roared off toward Redwood Bridge, a place that could hold answers, or the start of a new nightmare. Chapter 8. The First Sign. Nathan drove for 3 hours without a clear destination, his only goal to put miles between them and the unseen threat. As dawn broke, painting the sky with streaks of gold, he pulled into an aging gas station off the highway. Its neon sign flickered faintly in the morning fog, a relic of better days. He fueled up, his eyes never resting, scanning the surroundings for any hint of danger. Thor sat in the truck, ears perked, tracking every rustle and shadow outside. The scene appeared ordinary. Semis idling nearby, a grizzled man in a fur-lined coat nursing coffee by the vending machine. But then something caught Nathan's attention. A weathered billboard stood near the station, its faded ads peeling at the edges. Pinned to it was a small ragged scrap of paper flapping in the breeze. Nathan wheeled closer, and the scrawled words hit him like a punch. "Thor's not safe. Meet me at Redwood Bridge, 8 a.m. JJ. He'd tracked him down, but how, and why Redwood Bridge, nearly 50 miles away? Nathan glanced at his watch. 6:30 a.m. If he left now, he could make it. Doubt gnawed at him. Was this a lure into a trap? Thor let out a low growl from the truck, as if prodding him to decide. Nathan inhaled deeply, then returned to the driver's seat. "All right, buddy," he said, his voice steady with resolve. "We're going to see Jace, but if it's a setup, I'll make them regret it." The engine roared, and they sped off toward Redwood Bridge, a place that might hold answers or plunge them into deeper peril. Chapter 9. Redwood Bridge. The morning sun gilded the towering trees lining the road to Redwood Bridge. The old wooden structure spanned a narrow river, its rushing waters churning below in a ceaseless murmur. A chill wind carried the damp scent of forest earth, stirring the stillness with an eerie calm. Nathan parked the truck in a clearing nearby, killed the engine, and surveyed the area through the windshield. No one in sight, just the wind and the river's song weaving an uneasy symphony. He checked his watch. 7:45 a.m. 15 minutes until Jace's rendezvous. Nathan ran a hand over Thor's head. "What do you think, buddy?" he whispered. "Can we trust him?" Thor tilted his head, as if pondering, then growled softly, not a threat, but a reminder of his readiness to protect. Nathan offered a faint smile, though it faded fast. If this was a trap, escape options were slim. He had his handgun, a knife, and Thor enough for a skirmish, but not an ambush. He opened the door, pulled out his wheelchair, and set Thor on the ground. The dog stayed close, leash loose in Nathan's hand, though he knew Thor would act freely if needed. They rolled toward the bridge, the wheels crunching over uneven dirt. Halfway across, Nathan stopped, eyes darting between the road ends and the distant tree line. At exactly 8 a.m., a figure emerged from the woods on the far side. Jace Harper, still in his tattered military jacket, now with a cap pulled low over his eyes. He walked slowly, hands in pockets, his casual gait belied by a watchful edge. As he neared, he raised a hand in greeting. "You showed," Jace said, his raspy voice cutting through the quiet. "Wasn't sure you'd come." Nathan gripped the leash tighter, his gaze fixed on Jace. "Didn't have much choice. You said Thor's not safe. What do you know? And how'd you find me?" Jace smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I've got my ways." As for Thor, he glanced at the dog, a flicker of respect in his gaze. He's not just a target for the army. Those guys in the courtroom there from an outfit called the Blade. They hunt rare things, living weapons like Thor. Nathan's brow creased. The Blade? Never heard of them. Nobody has, Jace replied, his tone dropping. They work in the dark. No government, no nation, just money and power. I used to run with them, years back, before I saw what they really were. Monsters. They want Thor for what he can do: sense danger, predict threats. To them, he's not just a dog, he's a perfect war machine. Nathan's stomach tightened. He looked at Thor, still poised and alert, as if absorbing every word. Why are you telling me this? What's your game? Jace sighed, his eyes shadowed with weariness. I told you, I lost a partner once, didn't save him, and it haunts me. I don't want you to lose yours. But if you're keeping Thor, you need to know what you're up against. The Blade doesn't quit. They'll hunt you to the end. Nathan weighed Jace's words, mistrust warring with the fragments of truth they carried. He didn't fully buy it, but they aligned with his memories from Afghanistan, the odd insurgents. Their fixation on Thor. If you're straight with me, he said at last, tell me how to stop them. I'm not letting them take Thor. Jace nodded, as if expecting that answer. I can help, but you've got to trust me. We need a safe spot first, then I'll tell you everything I know. Before Nathan could reply, Thor snapped to attention, growling fiercely, his gaze locked on the woods beyond the bridge. Jace spun around, yanking a pistol from beneath his jacket. Damn it, he muttered. They've found us. 3 figures emerged from the tree-line, tall, clad in black faces, shadowed by hoods. The lead one was the stranger from the courtroom, his cold eyes glinting in the faint light. He smiled, his voice carrying over the wind. Sergeant Carter, you're a fast runner, but not fast enough. Chapter 10, The Chase. There was no time to think. Thor, go, Nathan shouted. The dog bolted toward the truck, yanking the leash taut. Nathan wheeled himself after him as fast as he could, the bridge's wooden planks groaning under his speed. Jace ran alongside, pistol in hand, glancing back at their pursuers. Heavy footsteps pounded behind them, swift and relentless. A gunshot cracked, the bullet embedding in the bridge just feet from Nathan, splintering wood into the air. Get down, Jace yelled, lunging to drag Nathan from the wheelchair. They hit the ground hard, Nathan clutching Thor as Jace pulled them to the roadside, ducking behind a large boulder. They're more than I expected, Jace panted, checking his ammo. 3 now, maybe more, in the woods. Nathan gritted his teeth, pulling his handgun from the backpack. They want Thor, I won't let them have him. Thor crouched low, growling, ready to leap at any moment. From behind the boulder, the stranger's voice cut through the air, calm and assured. Sergeant, you can't hide forever. Hand over the dog, and I'll let you live. Last offer. Go to hell, Nathan roared, popping up to fire a shot. The bullet grazed the stranger's shoulder, forcing him back a step. The other 2 opened fire in response, bullets ricocheting off the boulder with deafening cracks. We can't stay here, Jace shouted, returning fire and hitting one in the leg. The man crumpled, screaming, but the stranger and his remaining ally pressed forward, shooting with precision, like machines honed for war. Nathan hugged Thor tighter, shielding him, as they edged back toward the truck. Get us out, he yelled to Jace. You drive. Jace didn't argue. He hauled Nathan and Thor to the truck, shoving them into the back as he leaped into the driver's seat. The engine roared, tires screeching on gravel as they peeled out. Bullets chased them, one shattering the rear window in a spray of glass. They won't quit, Nathan yelled, holding Thor steady against the jolting ride. Where are we going? Jace clenched the wheel, eyes fixed ahead. I know a place, an old army outpost, abandoned years ago. If we make it there, we can hunker down and plan. Nathan nodded, though dread coiled in his gut. The Blade, the name echoed in his mind like a curse. Who were they, and why was Thor worth all this? Chapter 11. The Base in the Woods. The pickup truck barreled through twisting forest roads, sunlight filtering through dense foliage to dapple the cracked windshield. After nearly an hour of fleeing, Jace slowed, veering onto a narrow, weed-choked path. Ahead, hidden behind overgrown shrubs, loomed an abandoned Citan old military base, its grey concrete walls mottled with moss and creeping vines. "What is this place?" Nathan asked, his voice rough with fatigue. "Delta 7 base," Jace replied, cutting the engine. "Shut down since the Cold War. I've been here a few times back in my service days. No one knows about it anymore, at least. I hope not." They climbed out, Jace helping Nathan into his wheelchair while Thor leapt down, sniffing the air for threats. Inside, the air was cold and damp, a musty smell of mold rising from the shadowed corridors. Jace led them to a small room, its rusted tables and a faded map on the wall, the only remnants of its past. "We're safe for now," Jace said, setting his pistol on the table. "But they'll find us soon. The blade's got a wider net than you'd think." Nathan rested a hand on Thor's head, the dog's warmth easing his frayed nerves. "So what do we do? I need more on them. To beat them, I've got to understand them." Jace nodded, pulling up a chair across from Nathan. "All right, listen up. The Blade isn't new. They've been around for decades, operating under the guise of private companies, but they're really high-end mercenaries. They hunt tech, weapons, and even creatures with unique value, like Thor. I worked for them once, low-level stuff. When I saw they'd kill anyone to get what they wanted, I bolted." Nathan frowned, and Thor, why him? Jace leaned back, his gaze distant. "I don't know the full story. But I heard rumors they're building some secret project, a living weapon to shift the tides of war. Thor might be part of Itor, the key to finishing it. His knack for sniffing out danger isn't random. He could have been trained for it. Or," he hesitated, "maybe he's not entirely a normal dog." Nathan's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on Thor's fur. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jace shrugged. "I'm not sure. But I overheard them talk about experiments, crossbreeding, gene tweaking. If Thor's a product of that, he's worth more than you know." Nathan shook his head, rejecting the idea. "Thor's my partner. I don't care where he came from. He's saved me, and I'll protect him." Jace gave a faint smile. "I get it, but if you want to keep him, you've got to be ready to fight. The Blade doesn't give up. Next time, they'll bring more." Chapter 12. Secrets in the Dim Light. The room in Delta 7 base was cloaked in the faint glow of an old ceiling bulb, its exposed wires dangling like dried veins. Wind whistled through cracks in the concrete walls, a ghostly moan that seemed to whisper tales of the past. Nathan sat across from Jace, his hand on Thor's head, the dog's warmth anchoring him amid the storm swirling in his mind. Jace had just dropped a bombshell about the Blader. Shadowy group hunting living weapons like Thorond, hinted that the dog might not be what he seemed. "Experiments," Nathan echoed, his voice hoarse with doubt and worry. "You're saying Thor could be some lab creation?" Jace nodded slowly, his eyes lost in memories he'd rather forget. "I don't have hard proof, but when I was with the Blade, I caught snippets talk of a project called Sentinel. They were building creatures beyond nature, faster, smarter, sharper than any human. If Thor's tied to that, his danger sensing isn't a fluke. He might have been designed for it." Nathan shook his head, unwilling to accept it. "No, Thor's a dogger, real dog. I've been with him 3 years. I know what he eats, how he sleeps, how he reacts when he's hurt. If he's artificial, I'd have noticed." Jace shrugged, his gaze lingering on Thor. "Maybe you're right, but maybe you're not seeing the whole picture. The Blade doesn't waste time on ordinary dogs. They want him for something big." Nathan fell silent, his grip tightening on the leash. He thought back to when he first met Thor, a dusty morning at an Afghan base, a young pup assigned to his team. The commander had called him special, trained from birth to detect bombs and enemies. But no one explained why Thor was so uncanny, always a step ahead of danger with no visible cues. Back then, Nathan chalked it up to instinct. Now, with Jace planting seeds of doubt, he couldn't help but wonder. Was there more he'd never been told? Before he could press further, Thor shot to his feet, ears pricked, body rigid. He growled low, eyes fixed on the dark hallway beyond the room. Jace snatched his pistol, rising fast. "Something's off," he whispered, tension lacing his voice. Nathan clutched the leash, his heart pounding. "Thor doesn't do this for nothing. We're being watched." Jace edged to the door, pressing his ear to the wall. Seconds ticked by in silence. Then a sound emerged, soft but distinct footsteps echoing from deep within the hall. "Damn it," Jace muttered. "They've tracked us faster than I thought." Nathan pulled his handgun from the backpack, one hand steadying Thor. "How many?" Jace shrugged, but his eyes betrayed worry. "No clue, but if it's the blade, they don't travel solo." The footsteps grew louder, joined by the faint clink of metal weapons or gear. Thor's growls deepened, his hackles rising. Nathan took a steadying breath. "We've got to get out," he said, voice firm. "If we stay, we're trapped." Jace nodded, pointing to the room's far end. "There's a back exit tunnel to the forest edge, but we need to move fast." Without waiting, they sprang into action. Jace led the way, pistol aimed at the hallway, while Nathan wheeled after him, Thor at his side. They reached a rusted metal door, and Jace shoved it open with his shoulder, the hinges screeching in protest. Beyond lay a dark, damp tunnel, water dripping from the ceiling. "Go," Jace barked, just as a figure appeared at the hallway's mouth. A gunshot rang out, the bullet slamming into the wall where Nathan had been moments before. He gritted his teeth, rolling into the tunnel, Thor bounding ahead, while Jace fired back to buy them time. The tunnel was tight and pitch black, the wheelchair's wheels clattering over wet dirt. Gunfire echoed behind them, fading as they pushed deeper into the dark. After tense minutes, they reached an exit, a rusted hatch opening to the forest's edge. Jace forced it open, daylight flooding in, blinding Nathan briefly. They stumbled out, but there was no time to rest. The rumble of engines growled in the distance, and through the trees. Nathan glimpsed 3 black SUVs speeding toward the base. "They're here," he rasped. Jace grabbed the wheelchair's handles. "Run." Chapter 13. Flight through the forest. The forest closed around them, a tangle of brittle branches and thick undergrowth, forming a natural maze. Jace sprinted ahead, dragging Nathan's wheelchair over the uneven ground, while Thor raced alongside, nose twitching as he sought an escape. The engine's roar grew louder, joined by shouts and commands from their pursuers. "We can't keep running," Nathan yelled, gripping his pistol. "We need cover." Jace nodded, eyes darting through the trees. "There's a creek up ahead. We reach it, we can lose them." He pushed harder, ignoring the branches clawing at his face and arms. Minutes later, they stumbled onto the bank of a shallow creek, its swift waters tumbling over mossy rocks. Jace halted, breathless. "Into the water," he said. "It'll mask our scent. Thor'll be fine, but you." Nathan eyed the icy flow, then nodded. "I'll manage. Let's go." Jace helped Nathan from the chair, setting him on a rock by the bank, then stashed the wheelchair in the bushes. Nathan slid into the creek, the cold biting through his clothes, but he clenched his jaw and endured. Thor leapt in after him, water lapping at his belly, unflinching. Jace waded in last, pistol still in hand, eyes scanning behind them. They slogged through the current, the rush tugging at Nathan, forcing him to cling to Thor for balance. After a few minutes, they found a small cave beneath an overhanging boulder on the creek's edge. Jace signaled them inside, then crouched at the entrance, weapon ready. The engines fell silent, replaced by footsteps and voices drifting through the trees. "Where'd they go?" A gruff voice snarled. "Find the dog. It's priority 1. Nathan held Thor close, stroking his fur to keep him quiet. The dog stayed silent, but his body was taut, eyes piercing the cave's narrow opening. Through the dim light, Nathan saw their hunters, at least 5, all in black, armed to the teeth. The courtroom stranger led them, his cold eyes sweeping the forest like a predator. "They can't have gone far," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Spread out. Check for tracks. Kill the sergeant if you have to, but the dog stays alive." Nathan's chest tightened. They'd kill him to get Thor, but why? If Thor was a living weapon, like Jace claimed, what made him so valuable? What secret did he hold? Jace whispered beside him. They're more than I thought. If they spot us, we're done. Nathan nodded, gripping his gun. I'm not letting them take Thor, even if it kills me. Jace met his eyes, a flicker of respect in his gaze. I get it, but we're not out yet. Wait till they move off, then we plan a counter. They hunkered down in the cave, water soaking through their clothes, but no one dared stir. The hunters drew closer, their boots crunching on the creek's bank, mere yards away. Nathan held his breath, hand on Thor's head, praying they'd stay unseen. Chapter 14. The Woman in the Dark. After nearly 20 tense minutes, the footsteps faded, and the forest settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the creek's steady rush and the wind rustling through the leaves. Jace peeked out from the cave, scanning the surroundings, then signaled Nathan. They're gone, he whispered. But they'll circle back. Nathan crawled from the cave, water dripping from his soaked clothes onto the rocky ground. Thor leaped out after him, shaking his wet fur, though his alertness never wavered. Jace helped Nathan onto a dry boulder, then slumped beside him, exhaling heavily. We can't keep running like this, Nathan said, his voice rough. We need a way to stop them. But I've got to know the truth about Thor, the blade, all of it. Jace nodded, catching his breath. Fair enough. I was about to... A new voice cut him off, soft, yet sharp, like a breeze over ice. If you want the truth, you're already on the right path. Nathan and Jace whipped around, guns snapping up toward the sound. From the forest's shadows stepped a woman tall and lean, her frame taut with strength. She wore a fitted black outfit, her fiery red hair tied high, revealing a sharp, striking face. Her green eyes glinted like embers in the gloom, and a faint, dangerous smile played on her lips. Don't shoot, she said, raising her hands, though her tone held no fear. I'm not your enemy, name's Alina, and I know about the blade more than he does. She nodded toward Jace, a hint of disdain in her glance. Nathan's eyes narrowed, his grip steady on the gun. Who are you, and why should I trust you? Alina stepped closer, unfazed by the barrels aimed at her. I used to be part of the blade, not a grunt like him. She jerked her head at Jace, but a scientist. I worked on Sentinel, the project your dog's tied to. Nathan's blood ran cold. He glanced at Thor, then back at her. What are you saying? You? Made Thor? Elena's smile was thin, devoid of warmth. Not quite. Thor's S13 specimen was one of my early successes. I tweaked his genes to boost his senses and smarts, then trained him to detect threats. But I walked away before the project went further. And now the blade wants back what they think is theirs. Jace broke in, voice tight. You worked for them. Then why are you here? Elena's gaze turned icy as she faced him. I quit when I saw they weren't just after weapons, they wanted absolute control. Thor's not the only one. There are other specimens, far more dangerous. If the blade gets him, they'll use his DNA to perfect the project, and then nothing can stop them. Nathan hugged Thor tighter, his hand trembling. So, you're after what? Helping us? Or taking Thor for yourself? Alina met his stare, and for a moment, her eyes softened with something like sincerity. I want to destroy the blade, and I need you, especially Thor, to do it. Chapter 15. An Uneasy Alliance. The midday sun pierced the forest canopy, casting light on Elena's sharp features. She stood unflinching, her green eyes locked on Nathan, ignoring the guns still trained on her. Thor growled low, his body tense beside Nathan, sensing the peril she carried. Jace stood nearby, suspicion etched into his face, his grip tight on his pistol. I don't buy it, Nathan said, his voice low and firm. You say you created Thor and ditched the blade. How do I know you're not a plant they sent to trick us? Elena's lips quirked into a cold smile. If I were with them, you'd think I'd stroll up alone, unarmed, with 2 guns pointed at my face. The blade doesn't negotiate. They take what they want with blood and fire. I'm here because we've got the same enemy, Sergeant Carter. Jace cut in, tension crackling in his tone. You said Thor's part of Sentinel. If you ran that project, why'd he end up with the army? And why's the Blade so obsessed with him? Alina turned to Jace, her gaze edged with contempt. I didn't let him go anywhere. Thor's 30 was one of my first triumphs. I enhanced his genes for sharper senses and intelligence, trained him to spot danger. But when the Blade pushed Sentinel further into creatures that weren't dogs anymore, just monsters, I refused. I trashed my data and ran. I don't know how Thor landed with the army, but clearly, the Blade's been tracking him since. Nathan's chest tightened. He'd always known Thor was special, but hearing him labeled a specimen, a lab product, felt like a betrayal. So, Thor's not a real dog? He asked, his voice ragged. Alina shook her head, though her eyes softened slightly. He's a dog, just a better one. His genes are tweaked, but his emotions, his loyalty, everything you see, that's real. I didn't build a machine. I built a partner. Nathan fell silent, stroking Thor's fur. The dog looked up, his piercing eyes reassuring, as if he understood every word. Whatever Alina claimed, Nathan knew Thor wasn't just a test subject, he was family. All right, he said at last, lowering his gun but staying wary. Say I believe you. What do you want us to do? Alina stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. The Blade's finishing Sentinel's final phase. They've got a secret base 200 miles from here, up in the northern mountains. That's where they keep the other specimens, stronger, deadlier than Thor. If they get him, they'll use his DNA to perfect it. Then they'll have an unbeatable army, not just for sale, but to dominate. Jace's brow furrowed. You know all this, wife, haven't you taken them down yourself? Alina's laugh was sharp, humorless. I tried, but I'm a scientist, not a fighter. I need someone like you, Sergeant of Battlefield vet, and him. She nodded at Jace, someone who knows how the Blade ticks. And most of all, I need Thor. He's the only weapon that can match what I created. Nathan glanced at Jace, then Thor, weighing his options. He didn't like Alina, too secretive, too dangerous. But if she was telling the truth, this wasn't just about saving Thor anymore. It was about stopping a bigger threat. Fine, he said, his voice steely. But if you double-cross us, I swear Thor'll be the last thing you see. Alina nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. Fair enough, we've got no time to waste. The Blad'll be back soon. We need to move now. Chapter 16. Journey to the Mountains. The trio, Nathan, Jace, and Elenarit, turned to Nathan's battered truck with Thor in tow. The vehicle rumbled along the rough road, heading north, toward the misty mountains on the horizon. The cab was thick with silence, no one eager to break it. Nathan sat in the back with Thor, his hand resting on the dog's head, eyes never straying from Alina in the passenger seat. Jace gripped the wheel, while Alina studied her small USB drive, her expression unreadable. After an hour of quiet, Jace spoke up. You said they've got other specimens. What are they, and why's Thor more important? Alina turned, her green eyes cold but sharp. The ones after Thor S14 to S20 were built to outstrip him. Bigger, stronger, less feeling. I called them shadows, not dogs anymore, but walking killing machines. But they're unstable. Some went mad and self-destructed, others turned on their handlers. Thor's the perfect balance. Powerful, smart, yet loyal. His DNA has a rare strand, I dubbed it the loyalty chain. It keeps his instincts and bonds intact. Something the shadows lack. If they get Thor, they'll replicate that, creating a force that's both lethal and obedient. Nathan's stomach churned. So if they take him, they'll churn out monsters. Alina nodded. Exactly. And they won't stop there. The Blade wants to sell them to anyone with cash, terrorists, governments, or lunatics aiming to topple the world. But I suspect they've got their own agenda. Using the shadows to seize control. Jace tightened his grip on the wheel, his voice low. I've seen them kill without blinking for a single weapon. If you're right, this isn't just our fight anymore. It's everyone's. Nathan stayed quiet, staring at Thor. He'd only wanted to protect his partner, but now he was tangled in something massive. What do we need to destroy that base? He asked, his tone icy. Alina held up the USB. This has what I stole before I left: maps, codes, shadow intel, but to get in, we need firepower. I know a spot nearby that can supply us. Where? Jace pressed. An old army weapons cache, 50 miles out, she replied. It's decommissioned, but I know how to access it. We'll grab guns, grenades, whatever we need. Nathan nodded, though doubt lingered. All right. But if this is a trap, you won't live to see tomorrow. Elena's smile was faint. I'm used to threats, Sergeant. Chapter 17. The Cache Under the Hill. The truck rolled to a stop at the base of a low hill, its slopes overgrown with weeds and scrub. Beneath, concealed by a camouflaged metal door, lay the entrance to the weapons cache Alina had mentioned. The sun had dipped below the horizon, cloaking the area in shadow. With only the faint glow of moonlight illuminating their path, Alina took the lead, her small flashlight cutting through the dusk. Watch your step, she whispered. This place has been abandoned for years, could be traps. Jace helped Nathan from the truck, settling him into the wheelchair, while Thor padded ahead, nose twitching as he scouted for danger. They approached the metal door, a wave of rust and machine oil wafting from within as Alina eased it open. The cache was a labyrinth of steel racks, laden with dust-caked rifles, grenades, and ammo crates. Look at this, Jace said, lifting an M4 from a shelf. Still good to go. Nathan inspected a box of grenades, nodding. Enough for a small squad. But if the blade's as big as you say, we'll need more. Alina rummaged in a corner, then turned back with a rare grin. How about this? She hefted an old but intact rocket launcher. One shot could take out a crowd. They gathered gear quickly. Athen grabbed a rifle and a few grenades. Jace took the M4 and a combat knife, and Alina kept the rocket launcher. Thor stood watch, silent but vigilant, as if sensing their preparation for war. As they prepared to leave, Thor's ears shot up, his growl rumbling low. Alina flicked off her flashlight, and the trio ducked behind a steel rack. The distant growl of engines grew louder, closing in fast. They've found us, Jace hissed, clutching his rifle. Nathan gripped Thor, his heart hammering. No more running this time, he said, voice cold. We fight. Chapter 18. Night of Fire and Blood. Headlights pierced the darkness, 3 SUVs screeching to a halt outside the cache. The metal door shuddered under a heavy blow, then exploded inward with a deafening bang. Explosives, Nathan realized. He, Jace, and Alina crouched behind the rack, weapons primed. Thor pressed, close to Nathan, body taut, waiting. They outnumber us, Jace whispered. I count at least 10. Alina checked her rocket launcher. We don't need to win, just hold them off long enough to get out. Nathan glanced at Thor, then at his unlikely allies. No, he said, resolve hardening his tone. We're not just slipping away. We send a message. Touch Thor, and you pay. Before anyone could argue, boots clomped on the concrete, and shadows loomed in the dim light. The stranger from the courtroom stepped forward, his voice ringing out. Sergeant Carter, I know you're in there. Give up the dog, or we level this place. Nathan didn't answer. He nodded at Jace, who lobbed a grenade toward the entrance. The blast roared, shaking the cache, screams erupting as dust and debris rained down. Alina sprang up, firing the rocket launcher. A missile streaked into an SUV, turning it into a fireball. Nathan opened fire with his rifle, dropping to enemies in quick succession, while Jace darted out, slashing another with his knife. Thor didn't sit idle. He lunged at a man creeping close, sinking teeth into his leg and dragging him down with a howl. Nathan shouted, Thor, back. The dog obeyed instantly, returning to his side, eyes blazing with determination. The fight was chaos: gunfire, shouts, and the crackle of flames filling the air. The blade had numbers, but Nathan, Jace, Alina, and Thor's teamwork caught them off guard. After brutal minutes, the stranger barked, fall back. They're not worth the losses. The survivors scrambled to their remaining SUVs, leaving bodies and wreckage behind. As the engines faded into the night, Nathan collapsed against a rack, breathless, still clutching Thor. Jace and Alina stood nearby, scratched and battered but alive. "We won this round," Jace said, voice weary, "but they'll regroup." Nathan nodded, stroking Thor. "I know, but they're not getting you, buddy." Alina approached, a rare glint of admiration in her eyes. "You're tougher than I thought, Sergeant. Maybe we can actually stop the blade." Chapter 19. Road to Black Mountain. The weapons cache was now a smoldering ruin, black smoke curling into the night sky. Nathan, Jace, and Alina stood amid the wreckage, their breaths fogging in the cold. Thor sat beside Nathan, blood staining his fur from an enemy, but his eyes remained sharp and watchful. The skirmish was a small victory, but they all knew it was just the beginning. The blade wouldn't relent, not ever. "We need to move now," Alina said, her voice raspy from smoke and exhaustion. "They'll come back with more. The base at Black Mountain's our only shot to end this." Nathan nodded, running a hand over Thor's head. "You're right, but we need a breather, even just a bit. If we hit that place like this, we won't last." Jace slung the M4 over his shoulder, checking his ammo. "Agreed, but not here to expose. There's an old motel a few miles off, abandoned. I've crashed there before. We can rest an hour, then push on." No one objected. They piled back into the truck now, riddled with bullet holes and glass shards, but still running. Jace drove, Nathan sat with Thor in the back, and Alina studied her USB, lost in thought. The road to the motel was a narrow track, littered with fallen leaves and broken branches. The building emerged under the moonlight, crumbling wooden shell, its roof pocked with holes, windows shattered. Inside, the air was frigid and damp, the stench of rot rising from the floorboards. Jace swept the rooms, ensuring no threats lurked, while Nathan wheeled to a broken fireplace, its bricks long cold. Thor settled beside him, head on his lap, ever watchful. Alina took a torn armchair, plugging her USB into a small laptop she'd carried. "What's that?" Nathan asked, eyeing the screen's glow in the dark. "Map of the Black Mountain base," Alina replied, her tone flat. "It's tucked in a hidden valley, disguised as a weather station. Below, it's a web of labs and cages where they keep the shadow specimens." Jace returned, leaning his rifle against the table. "How many of those things do they have?" Alina clicked, pulling up a list. 7 samples, S14 to S20. Only 3 are still alive, 17, S19, and S20. The rest either died in testing or were put down when they couldn't be controlled. Nathan's brow creased. "How dangerous are they?" Alina swiveled the screen toward him, revealing a caged creature twice Thor's size. Black fur, gleaming eyes glowing red like blood. "This is S19, she said. 3 times faster than a normal dog, can rip steel with its jaws, and knows no fear. But it's not loyal, it attacks anything that moves, even its handlers." Nathan stared at Thor, a chill creeping up his spine. "And they want Thor to perfect these?" Alina nodded. "Yeah, Thor's DNA has that loyalty chain. It keeps him steady and bonded to humans, something the shadows don't have. With him, they'd churn out an army that's both deadly and obedient." Jace sank to the floor, exhaling heavily. "So we've got to blow that place sky high. But 3 of us, and a dog, we're outmatched." Alina flashed a thin smile. "Not quite. I've got a plan. But we need rest first. 1 hour, then we roll." Nathan agreed, but sleep eluded him. He watched Thor, the dog's eyes glinting in the dark, and wondered if he could shield him from what lay ahead. Chapter 20. Roar in the night. The hour at the motel passed in a blink. Nathan didn't sleep. He sat motionless, hand resting on Thor, listening to the wind howl through the broken walls. Jace sprawled on the floor, eyes shut but fingers still curled around his rifle. Alina typed away on her laptop, the screen's glow carving her face from the darkness, highlighting her steely resolve. When the clock struck 2 a.m., Alina stood. "Time's up. Let's move." They left the motel behind, piling back into the truck and rumbling toward the mountains. The road to Black Mountain grew rougher, the vehicle jolting over rocky inclines as the night deepened. The sky was a void, starless, as if the world held its breath for what lay ahead. After 3 hours, they reached a narrow pass, the spot, Elena's map marked as the base's hidden entrance. Jace parked behind a massive boulder, killing the headlights. "We're on foot from here," he said, voice low. Elena led with her flashlight, guiding them through dense underbrush. Nathan wheeled himself along, but the rugged terrain forced Jace to assist. Thor took point, nose twitching, ears alert like a living radar. They reached a steel door camouflaged against the rock face, the secret way in, as Elena had promised. "Careful," she whispered, punching a code into a keypad. The door hissed open with a faint groan, revealing a pitch-black corridor beyond. They stepped inside, the air cold and metallic, tinged with a sterile Thames. The hallway spiraled down a staircase, lit by dim red emergency bulbs. Nathan's pulse quickened not from fear, but from knowing they were nearing the heart of this nightmare. At the bottom, a vast lab unfolded before them, brimming with sleek machines and glass cages. In one stood S-19, the monster Elena had shown them. It loomed still, red eyes boring into them, jaws glinting like steel. Nearby were two more cages, holding S-17 and S-20, smaller but no less menacing. "God help us," Jace muttered, gripping his rifle tighter. "They're real." Elena nodded, her voice icy. "Welcome to Sentinel. This is where it all started, and where it'll end." Before anyone could reply, an alarm blared, red lights flashing across the lab. Footsteps thundered from the corridor behind, and the courtroom stranger's voice echoed. "Did you think you could sneak in unnoticed? Welcome to hell, Sergeant Carter." Chapter 21. Showdown below ground. The steel door slammed shut behind them, the clang reverberating in the tight space. Nathan, Jace, and Elena dove behind a bank of machines, weapons ready. Thor growled, body coiled, eyes locked on the corridor where the steps grew louder. "We're ambushed," Jace hissed. "You said this was a back door." Elena clenched her teeth, checking her rocket launcher. "It was once. They must have upgraded security since I left." Nathan didn't care for excuses. He glanced at Thor, then his allies. "No way out now. We fight." The footsteps halted, and the stranger stepped into the lab, flanked by a dozen black-clad soldiers armed to the teeth. He wore tactical gear now, his scarred face fully visible under the red glow sharp, cold, a long gash slicing his cheek. He smirked, eyes pinning Nathan. "I'll give you credit, Sergeant," he said, his tone mocking. "You're stubborn. But the game's over. Hand over the dog, or die here with it." Nathan rose, bracing against the machine for balance. "You want Thor? Come get him." The stranger's grin vanished. He studied Nathan a moment, eyes narrowing as if gauging his defiance, then signaled his men to advance. But Elena acted first, leaping up and firing her rocket launcher. The missile streaked into the soldiers, erupting in a blast that felled three in a fiery heap. Jace followed, spraying bullets from his M4, dropping two more. Nathan fired his rifle, shots precise despite his shaking hands from exhaustion. Thor sprang into action, tackling a soldier creeping close, sinking teeth into his arm until his gun clattered free. "Thor, back!" Nathan yelled, and the dog returned, limping slightly from the strain. The stranger didn't join the fray. He watched, amused, as if it were a sport. But as his men fell, his smirk faded. He pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed it. The glass cages hissed open, releasing the three shadows S-17, S-19, and S-20. They burst free, red eyes blazing, their guttural roars drowning out the gunfire. S-19, the largest, charged Nathan, its jaws snapping for his throat. "Thor," Nathan shouted, and the dog intercepted, colliding with S-19 midair. The clash was brutal snarls, and tearing flesh echoing as Thor, smaller but nimble, dodged lethal bites. Jace wrestled with S-17, narrowly avoiding its claws with a knife stab to its leg. Elena rolled clear of S-20's lunge, firing a shot into its chest. It fell, but kept snarling. Nathan crawled toward Thor, gun in hand. S-19 was overpowering, but Thor fought on, clamping onto its leg to pull it off Nathan. "Good boy," Nathan yelled, firing into S-19's head. The beast collapsed, black blood pooling, though Thor bled to a deep gash on his shoulder. The stranger gritted his teeth, fury flashing in his eyes. "Enough," he roared, drawing a pistol and aiming at Nathan. But Alina lunged, slamming him to the floor. The remote skidded free, and Jace snatched it. Hitting a button to lock the surviving shadows, SF-10 and S-20 back in their cages, the fight paused, the lab filled with ragged breaths and the groans of the wounded. The stranger lay pinned under Alina, his glare defiant. "You think you've won," he spat. "This is one base. The blade's bigger than you can fathom." Nathan dragged himself to Thor, wrapping his arms around him. "I don't care," he rasped. "You came for Thor, you paid. That's all I need to know." Chapter 22. Fire Below the Earth. The lab was a wasteland, smoke curling from charred machines, blood streaking the metal floor, moans rising from fallen soldiers. Nathan cradled Thor, hands shaking as he checked the gash on the dog's shoulder. Blood soaked Thor's brown fur, but his eyes stayed bright, meeting Nathan's as if to say he was still there. Jace stood close, his torn sleeve exposing a bruised arm from S-17's attack, rifle still clenched. Alina kept the stranger pinned, her grip iron tight, green eyes blazing. "Talk," she snarled. "How many bases are there? How big is the blade?" The stranger's scarred face, now smeared with blood, chuckled, though it cost him a wince. "You think I'll spill, Alina? You're a traitor, but still naive. The blade's not just an outfit, it's an empire. Burn this place down." Another rises. Nathan glared, inching closer with Thor in his arms. "Say what you want. Touch Thor again, and I'll hunt every base you've got, and torch them to ash." The stranger's eyes flicked to Nathan, a twisted amusement in them. "Your loyalty's impressive, Sergeant, but it'll kill you on that dog." Before anyone could retort, a muffled blast echoed from the corridor. Thick white smoke billowed into the lab, followed by rapid footsteps. Jace spun. "They've called backup." Alina hauled the stranger up as a human shield. "We've got to destroy this place before they get here. If they recover Sentinel's data, this was for nothing." Nathan nodded, exhaustion be damned. Alina pointed to a row of glowing servers in the corner of the lab's brain, pulsing with Sentinel's secrets. "Grenades in there. A big enough blast will fry it all and maybe collapse this level." Jace bolted to the servers, pulling 2 grenades from his pack. "I've got it. Cover me." He worked fast, rigging them as Nathan aimed his rifle at the smoky corridor, Thor growling despite his wound. "Faster, Jace," Nathan shouted, firing at shadows in the haze as bullets flew back. His ammo was low. Jace finished, sprinting back. "Done. 30 seconds till it blows. Go." Alina shoved the stranger into the advancing soldiers, buying a moment's chaos. Nathan crawled for the stairs, Thor beside him, as Jace and Alina dragged him up. Each step was agony, the countdown ticking in Nathan's head. They burst through the outer door, just as a thunderous explosion rocked the earth below. The ground quaked, walls cracked, and a heat wave shoved them forward, sprawling onto the cold dirt. Smoke and dust swallowed the sight, but Nathan knew the bandits' secrets were gone. They lay there, gasping. Thor licked Nathan's face, checking him. Jace sat up, clutching his shoulder, while Alina stared at the ruins, a mix of satisfaction and regret in her eyes. "We did it," Jace rasped. But he wasn't lying. "This isn't everything." Nathan hugged Thor tight, uncaring. "Doesn't matter. As long as Thor's safe, I'll face whatever comes." Chapter 23. Dawn after the storm. The sun rose over the eastern ridge, bathing the black mountain ruins in golden light. The once hidden base was now a silent heap of rubble, smoke still curling from its depths. Nathan's truck sat nearby, scarred by bullets and dust, but still their lifeline. Nathan rested inside. Thor curled beside him, his shoulder wound hastily bandaged with a strip of Elena's torn shirt. Jace drove, eyes locked on the road ahead, while Elena sat shotgun, cradling her laptop, the last remnant of her stolen data. For the first hour, no one spoke. The silence wasn't tense but weary, a shared exhaustion binding them. Finally, Jace broke it. "Where to now? The blade won't let this slide." Alina turned, her gaze pensive. I've got to place a small outpost south of here, set up by others who've crossed the blade. They're not many, but they can hide us and help us plan." Nathan frowned. "Plan for what? We just torched their base." Alina shook her head. "That was just a piece. The Blade's a global web of the bases, backers, and guys like the one we fought. To really stop them, we've got to hit their core. Their main headquarters." Jace gave a dry laugh. "You're nuts. We barely survived that, and now you want to take on the whole outfit?" Alina fixed him with a cold stare. "Not right away, but if no one stands up, they'll keep going, not just for Thor, but for hundreds more specimens, thousands of lives." Nathan stayed quiet, stroking Thor's fur. He didn't want to think about more fighting. He'd dreamed of taking Thor home, living quietly like before. But deep down, he knew Alina was right. The Blade wouldn't stop. If he turned away, they'd return not just for Thor, but for everything he held dear. "All right," he said at last, voice low but firm. "I'm in. Not for the Blade, but for Thor. If they're still after him, I won't give them the chance." Alina nodded, a spark of respect in her eyes. "I figured you'd say that, Sergeant." Jace sighed, a faint smirk tugging his lips. "Hell, guess I'm in too. But this time, we need more than 3 people and a dog." Chapter 24. Oath Under the Moon. They stopped at a small gas station as evening fell, the moon hanging low in a star-strewn sky. Nathan eased out of the truck. Jace, helping him down, and settled on a weathered wooden bench nearby. Thor lay beside him, head resting on his lap, breathing steady despite his limp. Jace and Alina went inside for water and food, leaving Nathan alone with his thoughts. He gazed at Thor, a tumult of emotions swirling within. He'd nearly lost him again and again over these past days. Yet each time, Thor stayed, unwavering, even as danger closed in. Elena's words echoed. "I didn't build a machine, I built a partner." She was right. Thor wasn't just a specimen or a weapon, he was Nathan's family, the anchor that kept him afloat after the war. He leaned down, whispering, "You're everything to me, buddy. I don't care where you came from, or what they did to you. All I know is I won't let anyone take you." Thor lifted his head, licking Nathan's hand as if he understood. Nathan smiled, his first real smile in days, and felt a new resolve ignite within. When Jace and Alina returned with water bottles and a few packs of crackers, they found Nathan standing, leaning on the bench for support. "What's next?" he asked, voice steady. Alina sat across from him, opening her laptop. "The southern outpost is step 1. We'll rally others, people the Blade's hurt, fighters ready to push back. Then we find their headquarters." Jace shrugged, munching a cracker. "Sounds like suicide. But I've come this far, so why not?" Nathan nodded, eyes on Thor. "I'm not promising to save the world. But I'll protect Thor, and if that means tearing down the Blade, so be it." Under the moonlight, the 3 and their dog sat together, not storybook heroes, but survivors marked by scars and grit. They didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. They'd face it as a unit. Chapter 25. Lessons from the Ashes. Their journey didn't end at that gas station. In the weeks that followed, they reached the southern outpost, a hidden camp in a forest. Home to a ragtag band of Blade survivors, ex-soldiers like Jace, scientists like Alina, and ordinary folks who'd lost loved ones to the organization's greed. They weren't a mighty army, but they shared a purpose: to end the Blade. Nathan became their heart, not by choice, but through Thor, the dog, with his unshakable loyalty and strength, was a beacon of hope, proof that light could pierce even the deepest dark. Nathan trained them, sharing his battlefield know-how, while Alina offered intel and Jace scrounged resources. Months passed, and they pinpointed the Blade's headquarters, a fortified island off the Pacific coast. The final assault was brutal. They lost comrades, faced shadows more terrifying than S-19, and nearly broke. But, with Nathan, Thor, Jace, Alina, and their small crew working as one, they breached the stronghold, razing its command center and burning Sentinel's data for good. Back on the mainland, Nathan stood on a desolate beach, watching Thor bound along the surf. Jace and Alina lingered behind, bearing fresh scars, but lighter gazes than ever before. "We did it," Jace said, voice low. "But it cost us." Alina nodded. "Yeah, but we stopped them from making more monsters." Nathan didn't reply right away. He watched Thor, recalling their first meeting, a scrawny pup in an Afghan base, unaware of the secrets he carried. He'd fought not just for Thor, but for himself, to hold on to the one thing that pulled him through the abyss. "Life's not always fair," he said finally, voice rough. "But if you've got someone to lean on, man or dog, you can get through anything. That's what Thor taught me. That's why I never gave up." Jace smirked faintly, and Alina dipped her head, a thoughtful glint in her eyes. They stood in silence, watching the sun sink into the sea, leaving a final streak of light on the horizon. Epilogue: The Heart of the Roar. Nathan and Thor's tale didn't close with a perfect victory. The blade might rise again under a new name, and the world remained riddled with threats. But they'd shown that loyalty and sacrifice could defy even the darkest shadows. Thor wasn't just a dog, he was a symbol of trust, faith, and the strength found in bonds. Nathan learned that life wasn't about defeating every foe, but safeguarding what mattered most. With Thor at his side, he knew he'd always have a reason to press on, no matter how rough the road ahead. If you find the story interesting and meaningful, please click follow and like to support me to create more stories. Thanks.